6 Marines hit the ground in under 4 minutes. The smallest recruit in the platoon stood over them, not even breathing hard. Every man in that gymnasium had laughed at her just hours before. Now they couldn't even look her in the eye. This is the true story of Wren Callahan, a 20-year-old woman from the deadliest streets of Chicago who walked into Marine Corps training and rewrote everything they thought they knew about strength, size, and what it really means to be a warrior. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel and watch this story until the very end. Drop a comment telling us which city you are watching from. Let's see how far Wren's story travels tonight. The bus rolled to a stop at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego, and Wren Callahan heard the laughter before her feet even touched the ground. She had been expecting it, had prepared for it during the long flight from Chicago, during the bus ride from the airport, during every moment of the journey that had brought her to this place. She knew what people saw when they looked at her. 5'2", 115 pounds. Dark hair pulled back tight against her skull. A uniform that hung loose on her small frame, despite being the smallest size available. When she picked up her gear bag, it looked almost comically large against her body, like a child playing dress-up with her father's military equipment. She looked like she had wandered onto the wrong campus, like someone's little sister who had gotten lost on her way to a college tour. Like anything except what she actually was. "You gotta be kidding me." The voice came from behind her, loud enough for everyone within 50 feet to hear. Deep, confident, dripping with amusement and contempt. They're letting middle schoolers join now? Wren didn't turn around. She stepped off the bus, her boots hitting the pavement with a soft thud, and started walking toward the processing center in the distance. Her pace was steady, unhurried, the walk of someone who had nowhere particular to be and all the time in the world to get there. The voice followed her. "Hey, I'm talking to you, sweetheart. You lost? The Girl Scout recruiting office is probably down the street somewhere." More laughter now. A chorus of male voices finding humor in her presence, finding entertainment in her size, finding comfort in the assumption that she was exactly what she appeared to be. Wren kept walking. But her eyes were working, always working, cataloging, analyzing, processing information without appearing to notice anything at all. The man behind her was big. She could tell from the shadow that fell across the pavement beside her. 6'5", maybe 6'6". The way the gravel crunched under his feet suggested 200 pounds or more of solid muscle. His gait favored his right leg slightly, probably an old sports injury that had never fully healed. His breathing was shallow, the kind that came from developed chest muscles but underdeveloped cardiovascular conditioning. She noted the way he shifted his weight when he walked. Right leg dominant, probably a knee injury, maybe from football. That meant his lateral movement to the left would be slower than to the right. His shoulders were overdeveloped compared to his core, which suggested too much time on the bench press and not enough functional training. His hands, visible in her peripheral vision when he gestured while talking, were large but soft. No calluses, no scarring. He had never thrown a punch that landed on anything harder than a padded tackling dummy. A football player, she confirmed. The kind of man who had spent his entire life being the biggest person in any room. The kind who had never been overlooked, never been dismissed, never been laughed at for his size. The kind who had no idea what it meant to be underestimated. She filed the information away and kept moving. Growing up on the south side of Chicago taught you to ignore words designed to cut. Words only hurt if you let them. And Wren Callahan had stopped letting words hurt her a long time ago. She had learned that lesson in the hardest possible way, in alleys behind liquor stores where older kids thought a small girl would be easy prey, in schoolyards where being small made you a target for everyone who needed to feel powerful, in a neighborhood where the sound of gunshots was more common than the sound of birds singing, and where learning to read danger in a person's body language could mean the difference between going home and being carried home. They had all been wrong about her, every single one of them. The Marine Corps Recruit Depot stretched out before her like a concrete maze designed by someone who believed that efficiency and intimidation were the same thing. Buildings arranged in perfect military precision, each one identical to the last, distinguished only by the numbers painted on their sides. Everything painted the same shade of institutional beige that seemed designed to drain the color from the world. Flags snapping in the ocean breeze, the sound like gunshots in the morning air. Drill instructors moving between formations like sharks through water, their voices carrying across the open spaces in an endless stream of commands and criticism. And everywhere she looked, recruits who towered over her by a foot or more. Men with shoulders like refrigerators. Men with arms thicker than her thighs. Men with necks so wide they looked like they had been carved from oak trees. Men who moved through the world taking up space, demanding attention, assuming their right to be exactly where they were without question or apology. Ren moved between them like a ghost. She had learned that skill in Chicago too. How to be present without being noticed. How to watch without being watched. How to exist in spaces where people assume she didn't belong. Gathering information, cataloging weaknesses, filing away every detail that might become useful later. In her neighborhood, that skill had kept her alive. Here, it would serve a different purpose. At the processing center, she waited in line behind the massive man from the bus. Up close, he was even bigger than she had estimated. His neck was thicker than her waist. His hands could have wrapped completely around her head with room to spare. The muscles in his forearms looked like they had been carved from stone by someone who wanted to make a point about human anatomy. He glanced back at her and did a visible double take, as if he had forgotten she existed in the 2 minutes since he had been mocking her. "Wait, you're actually here to join?" He sounded genuinely surprised, like he had assumed she would have given up and gone home by now. "I thought for sure you were someone's kid's sister dropping off paperwork or something." "I'm here to become a Marine," Ren said simply. Her voice was quiet but steady, not aggressive, not defensive, just a statement of fact, as unremarkable as saying the sky was blue or the ground was beneath her feet. The man laughed, not cruelly exactly, more like someone who had just heard an unexpected joke and didn't quite know how to process it. "I'm Colton Reed," he said, extending a hand that swallowed hers completely when she shook it. His grip was firm but not crushing, the handshake of someone who was used to being careful with his strength around smaller people. "Played linebacker for Texas A&M, 4 years, all conference twice. What's your story, little girl?" "Ren Callahan, Chicago." "Chicago?" Another recruit pushed into the conversation, apparently deciding that sizing up the small woman was a group activity. He was shorter than Reed but built like a fire hydrant, with the compressed musculature of a wrestler and the cauliflower ears to match. "What part?" "South Side." The laughter stopped. It was like someone had flipped a switch. The amusement drained from their faces, replaced by something more cautious, more aware. The South Side of Chicago was not a place that inspired jokes. Anyone who knew anything about American cities knew what the South Side of Chicago meant. It meant survival wasn't guaranteed. It meant you learned to fight before you learned to read. It meant funerals for teenagers were as common as birthday parties. It meant growing up in a war zone that never made the national news but claimed lives every single day. "Tough neighborhood," the wrestler said carefully. His name was Tanner Vance, Ren would learn later, a standout from Arizona State's wrestling program, with a record that had attracted attention from scouts across the country. "Still," Vance continued, his voice losing some of its earlier mockery, "this is the Marines, not the same thing as street fighting." "I didn't say anything about street fighting," Ren replied. Before Vance could respond, a drill instructor materialized beside them, like she had teleported from another dimension. Staff Sergeant Nora Beckett, the nameplate read, a woman in her late 30s with hard eyes, close-cropped hair, and the bearing of someone who had seen combat and come out the other side with no patience for weakness or foolishness. 2 tours in Iraq, Ren would learn later. A Bronze Star for valor, the respect of everyone who had ever served with her and the fear of everyone who had ever trained under her. "You 3 want to keep chatting like you're at a coffee shop?" Beckett's voice could have cut through steel and come out the other side sharper than it went in. "Or do you want to actually become Marines?" "Ma'am, yes ma'am." The response came automatically, all 3 of them snapping to something approximating attention. Beckett's eyes swept over them, dismissing Reed and Vance with a glance before settling on Ren. Something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or curiosity, or something else entirely that Ren couldn't quite identify. Then it was gone. "Move now." They moved. The barracks were designed to strip away individuality. Rows of identical bunks stretched from one end of the building to the other, each one exactly the same distance from its neighbors. Identical footlockers sat at the foot of each bed, waiting to be filled with identical gear. The walls were bare of any decoration, any personal touch, any acknowledgement that the people who would sleep here were anything other than interchangeable parts in a vast military machine. The message was clear. You are not special. You are not, you are not unique. You are one of many, and you will earn the right to stand out through your actions, not your words or your appearance, or the life you lived before you walked through these doors. Wren understood that message. She had learned a similar lesson on the streets of Chicago, where the only thing that mattered was what you could do, not what you claimed you could do, or what you looked like, or what people assumed about you. She was assigned to a bunk near the back corner, next to a tall woman from Georgia named Joanna Whitfield. Jo stood nearly a foot taller than Wren, with kind eyes that seemed out of place in this environment of harsh edges and harder voices. "I'm Jo," she said quietly as they arranged their gear. "From Savannah." "Wren, Chicago." "South Side?" Joe's eyebrows rose slightly. "I heard someone mention that earlier. Word travels fast around here." "Seems like it does." "Is it really as bad as they say, the South Side?" Wren considered the question, considered how to answer it honestly without revealing too much, without letting this stranger see the things that live behind her carefully constructed mask. "It's home," she said finally, "or it was." That first night, Wren lay in her bunk and listened to the sounds of the barracks settling. 47 recruits breathing, shifting, whispering in the darkness. Some of them were crying quietly, already overwhelmed by the transition from civilian life. Others were snoring, apparently unbothered by anything. A few were praying, their whispered words barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. Wren didn't sleep. She rarely did on the first night in a new place. Her body was too wired, too aware, too ready to respond to threats that might come from any direction. Instead, she let her mind drift back to Chicago, to the apartment she had shared with her grandmother until 3 months ago, to the woman who had raised her since she was 8 years old, to the lessons that had shaped every part of who she had become. Margaret Callahan, Maggie to everyone who knew her, the strongest person Wren had ever known. Wren's parents had been killed in a gang shooting when she was 8 years old. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October, the kind of crisp, clear day that made you think nothing bad could possibly happen. The leaves were changing colors. The sky was that perfect shade of autumn blue. Children were playing in the streets, their laughter mixing with the sound of traffic and distant music. Wren had been at school, sitting in Mrs. Patterson's third-grade classroom, learning about fractions and wondering what her mother was making for dinner. When she came home, her street was blocked by police tape. Flashing lights, neighbors standing in clusters, some crying, some just staring at the ground with the 1,000-yard stare of people who had seen too much violence to be surprised by any of it anymore. The particular kind of silence that falls over a community when death has visited without warning. Her parents had been walking home from the grocery store, wrong place, wrong time. Collateral damage in a war nobody had officially declared, but everyone was fighting. 2 gangs had chosen that afternoon, that street, that moment to settle a dispute that had nothing to do with the innocent people caught in the crossfire. 14 shots fired, 3 people hit. Her father died instantly, a bullet through his heart. Her mother made it to the hospital but was gone before Wren could see her, before anyone could tell her that her daughter loved her, before she could say goodbye. Wren was 8 years old and she was alone. Or she would have been, if not for Margaret Callahan. Wren's grandmother had arrived from across the city the next morning, before the sun was fully up. A woman in her 60s who walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen everything life could throw at her and was still standing. Her gray hair was pulled back in a practical bun. Her clothes were simple but clean. Her eyes held a depth of knowledge that most people spent their entire lives without acquiring. She didn't cry when she saw Wren, didn't offer empty words of comfort or promises that everything would be okay. She simply took Wren's hand in her own calloused grip and said the words that would change everything. "You will not die like your parents." That was all. No preamble, no explanation, just a statement of fact, delivered with the absolute certainty of someone who had decided something and would not be moved from that decision by anything short of death itself. "You will not die like your parents," Maggie repeated. "I'm going to teach you to survive." What most people didn't know about Margaret Callahan was that she wasn't just a grandmother. She wasn't just a retired woman living in Chicago, collecting Social Security and watching game shows and waiting for the end. From 1975 to 1990, Maggie Callahan had been one of the first female boxing instructors at Fort Bragg. 15 years of training soldiers, 15 years of proving that women could teach men how to fight, how to survive them, how to win. 15 years of breaking barriers that the entire military establishment said couldn't be broken, of earning respect through competence when the system wanted to dismiss her for her gender. She had trained some of the first women to enter combat support units, had watched her students deploy to places where the skills she taught them meant the difference between life and death, had received letters from soldiers thanking her for keeping them alive in firefights and ambushes and all the thousand unnamed horrors of war. She had been a pioneer, a trailblazer, a woman who had proven that the things people believed about women in combat were nothing but comfortable lies told by people who had never tested those beliefs against reality. And then she had retired, moved to Chicago to be near family, and waited. Waited for something worth training again. Wren was that something. The training started the day after her parents' funeral. The apartment was still full of flowers from the memorial service, their sweet smell mixing with the ever-present Chicago smells of exhaust and cooking food from neighboring units. Relatives had come and gone, offering condolences and casseroles and promises to help that everyone knew would be forgotten within a week. Maggie waited until they were alone. Then she cleared the small living room of furniture, pushing the couch and coffee table against the walls to create an open space maybe 10 feet square. "Come here," she said to Wren. Wren obeyed. Still numb from everything that had happened, still not quite believing that her parents were gone and never coming back. Maggie knelt down to look her in the eye, her hands, rough with calluses from decades of physical work, cupped Wren's face gently. "Your parents were good people," Maggie said. "They loved you more than anything in this world. But they made a mistake." "What mistake?" Wren whispered. "They walked through the world trusting that nothing bad would happen to them. They believed that if they were good people, if they worked hard and followed the rules and didn't bother anyone, the world would leave them alone." Maggie's eyes were sad but steady. "That's not how the world works. Bad things happen to good people every single day. The world is not safe. It has never been safe. People will try to hurt you, not because you deserve it, but because hurting others is how they feel powerful." She stood up, her knees cracking with the effort. "Your job is to make sure they fail. From now on, we train." At 8 years old, Wren learned how to make a fist properly, how to tuck her thumb outside her fingers so it wouldn't break on impact, how to align her wrist with her forearm so the force of a punch would travel through the bones, not the joints. She learned how to stand, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced on the balls of her feet, knees slightly bent, ready to move in any direction, chin tucked to protect the jaw, hands up to protect the face. She learned how to breathe. Deep breaths from the diaphragm, not shallow gasps from the chest. How to exhale sharply when throwing a punch to tighten the core and add power. How to control her breathing so she could take a hit without losing her air. "Most fights are won before the first punch is thrown," Maggie told her during one of those early sessions. "They're won by the person who stays calm while their opponent panics, by the person who sees clearly while their opponent sees red, by the person who thinks while their opponent reacts." Every day after school, Wren trained. Weekends too, holidays, summer vacation. There were no days off, no excuses, no exceptions. By 10, she could throw combinations that would have impressed professional fighters. Jab, cross, hook, uppercut, delivered with speed and precision that seemed impossible for a child her size. By 12, she could dislocate a grown man's shoulder in under 3 seconds. Her grandmother had taught her exactly where to grab, exactly how to twist, exactly how much pressure to apply to take a joint past its natural range of motion. "Size means nothing," Maggie would say during their training sessions. "The human body has the same weaknesses, whether it's 5 feet tall or 7 feet tall. Eyes, throat, groin, knees. Learn where to strike, learn how to strike, and you can bring down anyone." By 15, Wren had added Taekwondo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to her grandmother's boxing foundation. She trained at gyms across Chicago, anywhere that would let a teenage girl through the door. Some of the instructors laughed at her size. Most stopped laughing after the first sparring session. And then came the medical bills. Maggie's diabetes diagnosis came first, in the spring of Wren's junior year of high school. Then the kidney problems, complications from years of the disease going undertreated because she couldn't afford the medications that might have prevented the damage. Then the heart condition, the weakened muscle that struggled to pump blood through her failing body. Each new complication brought new specialists, New treatments, new bills that stacked up like accusations on the kitchen table, each one demanding payment that neither of them had. Insurance covered some of it. Not enough. Never enough. The gap between what they owed and what they could pay grew larger every month, a hole that threatened to swallow everything they had. Wren worked part-time jobs. After school, on weekends, any hour she could spare from training and homework. Fast food restaurants, retail stores, cleaning offices at night. But minimum wage didn't make a dent in bills that ran to tens of thousands of dollars. She was 17 when she fought her first underground match. The underground fighting circuit in Chicago operated in the shadows, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Warehouse districts, abandoned factories, basements of bars that officially didn't exist. Cash changed hands in parking lots. Bets were placed through whispered conversations. And once or twice a week, people who had no business being in the same room gathered to watch other people hurt each other. A guy named Marcus, who worked at one of the gyms where she trained, told her about it. He had seen her demolish sparring partners twice her size, had watched her move with the kind of precision that couldn't be taught, only honed through thousands of hours of practice. There's money to be made, Marcus had said, his voice low even though they were alone in the gym. Good money, for someone with your skills. I'm 17. Nobody asked for ID, and nobody's going to believe you're 17 anyway. You look 12. That's actually an advantage. People bet against you because you look helpless. Then you take their money. Wren thought about the bills on the kitchen table, about her grandmother's deteriorating health, about the collectors who called every day, their voices alternating between threatening and sympathetic as they demanded money that didn't exist. Tell me more, she said. The first fight was against a woman named Big Sheila, who outweighed Wren by at least 60 pounds. She was tall, heavy-set, with arms like tree trunks and a reputation for breaking bones. The crowd that had gathered in the abandoned warehouse laughed when Wren walked into the makeshift ring. They placed bets on how many seconds she would last. 15 seconds, someone called out. I'll take under 10, another voice answered. $5 says she doesn't land a single punch. Big Sheila grinned, showing teeth that had been broken and badly repaired more than once. Don't worry, little girl. I'll try to make it quick. The fight lasted 8 seconds. Wren slipped Sheila's first haymaker, stepped inside her reach, and delivered a precise combination to the liver that dropped the larger woman like a sack of concrete. Sheila was unconscious before she hit the floor, and the warehouse went silent. Wren collected $500 in crumpled bills and walked out without saying a word. They called her the little ghost after that, the small girl who appeared from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly, leaving unconscious opponents in her wake. She fought men, women, anyone they put in front of her. She broke arms and dislocated shoulders and choked people unconscious on dirty concrete floors. She never lost, not once. 3 years of fighting, dozens of matches, 0 defeats. Every dollar went to her grandmother's medical bills. And then, 3 months before shipping out to San Diego, Margaret Callahan had died peacefully in her sleep, with Wren holding her hand. You go be a warrior now, Maggie had whispered in her final days. Her voice was weak, barely audible, but her eyes were clear, certain, proud. Show them what a small woman can do. I trained them for 15 years. Now you become one of them. Finish what I started. Wren intended to do exactly that. But not yet. Not until the moment was right. But the first day of official training brought a new presence into Wren's world. A man who would become her most dangerous enemy. Sergeant Bryce Hartwell. He wasn't assigned to her platoon initially. He belonged to 3rd Platoon, on the other side of the depot. But word traveled fast in a place like this, and Hartwell had heard about the tiny female recruit who looked like she belonged in a high school hallway instead of Marine Corps training. He made a point of finding her during the first morning formation, walking across the parade ground specifically to get a look at her. Hartwell was 3rd-generation Marine Corps. His grandfather had served in Korea, earning a Silver Star for valor in the frozen hell of the Chosin Reservoir. His father had served in the Gulf War and had spent his entire career loudly, publicly opposing the integration of women into combat roles. He had written articles about it, given speeches about it, made it his personal mission to keep the Marine Corps as he believed it should be. A brotherhood of warriors, with emphasis on the brother. The Hartwell family believed in tradition. They believed in the natural order of things. They believed that some doors should remain closed, no matter how loudly people knocked. And the natural order, in their view, did not include women like Ren Callahan. So this is the one. Hartwell's voice cut through the noise of the morning assembly like a knife through paper. He was tall, well-built, with the kind of jaw that suggested he had never backed down from anything in his life. His uniform was immaculate, every crease perfect, every medal exactly where it should be. His bearing was the bearing of someone who had grown up being told he was special and had never seen any reason to doubt it. This is the pixie they let through the door. Ren kept her eyes forward. She could feel Hartwell circling her like a predator, assessing prey. Could feel the weight of his contempt pressing against her like a physical force. My father warned me about this, Hartwell continued, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Said they'd start letting anyone in eventually. Said it would weaken the core, dilute the standards, turn the world's finest fighting force into a social experiment. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. Women don't belong in combat. They never have. They never will. It's not an insult. It's just biology. Staff Sergeant Beckett appeared seemingly from nowhere. Something you need, Sergeant Hartwell. Her voice was ice. Her eyes were colder. Just introducing myself to the new recruits, Staff Sergeant. Hartwell's expression shifted to something more neutral, but the contempt never left his eyes. Building unit cohesion. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Then consider yourself introduced. Move along. Hartwell smiled, but there was no warmth in it. His eyes lingered on Ren for a moment longer than necessary, making sure she understood that this conversation wasn't over. We'll talk again, Pixie, he said quietly, so only she could hear. Count on it. He walked away, but Ren knew this wasn't over. She had seen that look before, in Chicago, in the underground circuits, in the eyes of men who couldn't accept being shown up by someone smaller than them. Hartwell wasn't just hostile, he was threatened. And threatened men, Ren knew from experience, could be dangerous. The first week of training was designed to break recruits down. Physical exhaustion pushed to the limits of human endurance. Mental pressure applied from every direction, constantly, relentlessly. Sleep deprivation that left everyone functioning in a fog. Meals eaten in 3 minutes or less, shoveling food into mouths that barely tasted it. Every moment monitored, judged, criticized by drill instructors who seemed to have graduated from a special school for creative insults. Senior drill instructor Gunnery Sergeant Davis ran their platoon like a man who had seen too much combat and had zero patience for weakness of any kind. He was a mountain of a man, 6'4", with scars running across his forearms and a voice that could be heard across the entire depot. When he spoke, even the other drill instructors listened. Callahan, he shouted during the first morning formation, somehow picking her out from 47 identically dressed recruits. Are you supposed to be here, or did you get lost on the way to elementary school? Sir, this recruit will complete all required training and graduate as a Marine, sir. Davis walked closer and closer until he was looking down at her like she was an insect he was considering stepping on. You're 5'0". You weigh about as much as my left leg. The obstacle course has walls taller than you. The packs we carry weigh half what you do. He paused, letting the words sink in. What exactly do you think you are going to contribute to my Marine Corps? Sir, this recruit will demonstrate that contribution through actions, not words, sir. Davis leaned in until his face was inches from hers. His breath was hot against her skin. Will you now? Sir, yes, sir. We'll see about that, Callahan, we'll see about that. He moved on to the next recruit, but Ren could feel eyes on her from every direction. She had been marked, singled out. Made an example of what failure looked like before she had even been given a chance to fail. Good, she thought. Let them underestimate me. The obstacle course became Ren's first public struggle. It was designed for people much taller than her, and nobody had thought to adjust for the possibility that someone her size might attempt it. The walls stretched 10 feet high, their surfaces smooth and unforgiving. The rope climbs required upper body strength that could lift your entire body weight without assistance. The cargo nets had gaps that a small person could slip through if they weren't careful. Where other recruits could reach up and grab the top edge of a wall, Ren had to jump, catch, and pull herself up with pure upper body strength. Where others could take the rope in 2 hands and walk up the wall, Ren had to rely entirely on her arms. She struggled, deliberately. Come on, Pixie! Corporal Dalton Nash shouted from the sideline. He was the assistant drill instructor, a man who seemed to take personal pleasure in the suffering of others. My grandmother could climb faster than that, Hell, my grandmother's dead and she could still climb faster than that. Ren let her arms shake, let her grip slip, let herself dangle from the rope like she was about to fall at any second. Made every inch of progress look like a monumental struggle that was draining every ounce of strength from her body. It was a performance, and she was giving it everything she had. Pathetic, Nash continued, warming to his theme. Absolutely pathetic. Are you even trying, Callahan? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're just hanging there taking a nap. The other recruits were watching. Colton Reed was grinning from ear to ear, his earlier prediction about her apparently being confirmed. Tanner Vance shook his head slowly, like he was watching something sad but inevitable. Joe Whitfield looked away, embarrassed on Ren's behalf. Ren made it over the wall. Eventually. Dead last in her group by a margin of several minutes. Covered in dirt and appearing completely exhausted, bent over with her hands on her knees, like she might collapse at any moment. You just cost your entire platoon 20 extra push-ups, Nash announced, his voice carrying across the field. Everyone, thank Recruit Callahan for her outstanding performance. Thank you, Recruit Callahan. The platoon shouted in unison, their voices dripping with resentment. That night, the nickname Pixie spread through the barracks like wildfire. Colton Reed opened a betting pool by the end of the first week. $10 says she quits by Wednesday, he announced in the mess hall, loud enough for everyone, including Ren, to hear. I'll take that action, Tanner Vance replied, but I say she doesn't make it past the weekend. You're both wrong, another recruit chimed in. She'll fake an injury tomorrow. Get herself a medical discharge. I've seen it 100 times. $20 says she cries before lights out tonight. I'll take that bet. She doesn't look like the crying type. Everyone cries eventually. This place is designed to make you cry. Just wait. Ren sat alone at the end of a table, eating her food in silence. She could hear every word, cataloged every voice, memorized every face. Let them laugh. Let them bet. Let them believe they already knew how this story would end. The harassment intensified during the fourth week. It started small, almost innocent. Insults whispered just loud enough for Ren to hear as she passed. Accidents during training that left her with bruises no one asked about. Gear that mysteriously went missing from her footlocker. A canteen one day, a boot the next, her toiletries the day after that. But then Sergeant Hartwell got himself transferred to their platoon. The official reason was to balance skill levels between units, some bureaucratic shuffle that looked perfectly reasonable on paper. The real reason became clear the moment Hartwell walked into their barracks for the first time, his eyes scanning the rows of bunks until they found exactly what they were looking for. Hello again, Pixie, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Told you we'd talk again. From that moment, the campaign against Ren became organized, systematic, professional. Hartwell coordinated with Colton and Tanner. He whispered instructions during meals, quiet conversations that stopped whenever Ren came within earshot. He identified opportunities during training exercises, pointing out moments when accidents could happen without anyone being blamed. Every session became an exercise in making Ren's life as miserable as possible while maintaining plausible deniability. She was partnered with the largest opponents in every drill. She was the target of every aggressive demonstration. She absorbed elbows and kicks and punches that were supposedly accidental, but landed with suspicious precision on the same spots day after day. An elbow to the ribs during a grappling exercise. A knee to the thigh during a takedown drill that left her limping for 2 days. A forearm to the face that was supposed to be a blocked punch, but somehow slipped through her guard. By the end of the fourth week, Ren's body was covered in bruises she never let anyone see. Her ribs ached constantly. Her thigh was a mottled map of purple and yellow. Her face had a cut above the eyebrow that she told people came from hitting her bunk in the middle of the night. But she never complained, never showed pain, never gave them the satisfaction of knowing they had affected her at all. At night, after the barracks went quiet and the last whispered conversations faded into snoring, Ren would slip out of her bunk and make her way to the bathroom. The clock on the wall would read 0300, that dead hour of the night when even the most dedicated drill instructors were asleep. She would lock the door, check that she was alone, and begin to train. In the dim light of the emergency exit signs, she would move through the forms her grandmother had taught her. Slowly at first, feeling each position, each transition, each moment where power could be generated or absorbed. Then faster. Her hands cut through the air with precision that would have shocked anyone who had watched her struggle during official training sessions. Her feet moved in patterns her grandmother had drilled into her over 12 years of relentless practice. Her body flowed from technique to technique like water finding its way downhill, following paths that had been carved so deep they were now instinct. She practiced strikes, whams, crosses, hooks, uppercuts, body shots and headshots, combinations that flowed into each other, each technique setting up the next in an endless chain. She practiced blocks, high guards and low guards, parries and redirections, ways to absorb punishment in ways to make punishment miss entirely. She practiced throws, hip throws and shoulder throws, trips and sweeps, ways to use an opponent's momentum against them, to turn their strength into their weakness. She practiced submission holds, chokes and joint locks, ways to end a fight without throwing a single punch if that was what the situation required. And through it all, she heard her grandmother's voice. The enemy will always underestimate you. That is their gift to you. Their arrogance blinds them to what you really are. Let it blind them until it's too late. Size means nothing if you know how to use it against them. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. That's not just a saying, it's physics. A 200-pound man has the same vulnerable points as a 100-pound man. Eyes, throat, groin, knees. The body doesn't care how many muscles you have when a thumb is pressing into your eye socket. Never show your hand until you're ready to play it. Let them think you're weak. Let them think you're helpless. And when they come for you, when they think victory is assured, that's when you destroy them. Fighting is not about trading blows. Fighting is about ending the fight as quickly as possible. Every second you spend in combat is a second something can go wrong. Strike fast, strike hard, strike once. Make that one strike count. Ren remembered a night in Chicago 2 years ago when she had internalized that lesson in the most brutal way possible. She had been fighting in a warehouse on the west side, a place that smelled of rust in old machinery and the sweat of desperate people making desperate choices. Her opponent was a man named Crusher, 6'3", 240 pounds, with a record of 15 wins and 0 losses. His last 3 opponents had been hospitalized. One of them never walked the same way again. The crowd had laughed when Ren stepped into the ring. They had placed bets on whether she would survive 30 seconds or 60. Nobody bet on her winning. The odds were too ridiculous to contemplate. Crusher had smiled at her, showing teeth that had been broken and poorly repaired multiple times. "Nothing personal, little girl," he had said, "but I got bills to pay." The fight started with Crusher throwing a massive haymaker that would have taken her head off if it had landed. Ren ducked under it, feeling the wind of its passage ruffle her hair, and stepped inside his guard. 3 strikes. That was all it took. A palm strike to the solar plexus that folded him in half. An elbow to the temple as his head came down. A knee to the face as he dropped. Crusher hit the floor like a demolished building, unconscious before he landed. Total time, 4 seconds. The warehouse had gone silent. The same silence that would fill the Marine Corps gymnasium years later. The silence of people confronting something they couldn't explain, something that violated everything they thought they knew about how the world worked. Ren had collected her money and walked out without a word. Behind her, she could hear people arguing about what they had just seen. Some claimed it was fixed. Some claimed Crusher had taken a dive. Nobody wanted to accept the truth. The truth was simple. Size didn't matter when you knew exactly where to strike and exactly when to strike it. The truth was that power came from technique, not muscle. The truth was that Ren Callahan had been forged in the fires of the South Side, trained by a woman who had spent 15 years teaching soldiers how to kill, and tempered by 3 years of underground fighting against opponents who wanted to hurt her. She was not a pixie. She was a weapon, and soon everyone would know it. For an hour each night, Ren danced with shadows. She fought imaginary opponents who attacked with the same patterns she had observed in Colton, Tanner, and Hartwell during the day. She knew Colton's hands overhand right, the way he dropped his guard when he threw it, the slight lean in his stance that telegraphed which direction he would move. She knew Tanner's wrestling takedowns, the way he committed too much weight, the predictable pattern of his shots. She knew Hartwell's combinations, the tension in his jaw before he attacked, the shift in his shoulder that gave away his timing. Every weakness, every pattern, every exploitable habit. When she finished, her breath was steady, her heart rate barely elevated. One more week of being underestimated. One more week of insults and pranks and casual cruelty. And then she would show them all what a warrior from the south side of Chicago was really capable of. Bucky. Staff Sergeant Beckett pulled Wren aside after the third week of training. They were alone in a corridor between buildings, away from the eyes and ears of other recruits. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the concrete, and the sound of distant drill commands carried on the wind. Callahan. Beckett's voice was uncharacteristically soft. I've been watching you. Ma'am? During the drill yesterday, when Vance threw that combination at you in the sparring exercise, you slipped it perfectly. Textbook head movement, the kind of movement that takes years to develop. Beckett's eyes narrowed, but then you pretended to struggle with a basic block that any beginner should be able to handle. Wren said nothing. I've been doing this for 12 years, Beckett continued. I've seen a lot of recruits come through here. Some of them are exactly what they appear to be. Awesome. Some of them are hiding things. She stepped closer. Weaknesses they don't want anyone to see, or strengths. Ma'am, I'm not sure what you mean. I think you know exactly what I mean. Beckett held Wren's gaze. Your grandmother, Margaret Callahan, I know that name. Something shifted in Wren's eyes, the first crack in her mask. She was a legend at Fort Bragg, Beckett said. I heard stories about her when I was a recruit. The woman who trained soldiers better than most men could. The woman who proved that gender didn't matter when it came to teaching people how to survive. She paused. She trained you, didn't she? Yes, ma'am, she did. Beckett nodded slowly, like a puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. Whatever you're planning, whatever you're waiting for, be careful. The men in this platoon don't like being surprised, and they really don't like being embarrassed. She paused, especially not by women, especially not by small women. I'll keep that in mind, ma'am. See that you do. Beckett turned to leave, then stopped. And Callahan, your grandmother would be proud of you, whatever happens next. Usham. The night before the evaluation, Joe Whitfield found Wren alone in the bathroom. It was past midnight. The barracks were silent except for the sounds of sleeping recruits. Joe closed the door behind her and stood there, looking more uncomfortable than Wren had ever seen her. I need to tell you something. Go ahead. I've been a coward. Joe's voice cracked slightly. These past weeks, watching how they treat you, watching what Hartwell does, I should have stood up, should have said something. Instead, I just protected myself. You did what anyone would do. That doesn't make it right. Joe took a deep breath. But that's not why I'm here. There's something else, something you need to know. Wren waited. Hartwell is planning something. I overheard him talking with his guys earlier tonight. Joe's eyes were serious. He said no matter what happens in the evaluation tomorrow, he's going to end the Pixie problem afterward. He talked about a training accident, about making sure you get hurt badly enough for a medical discharge. Wren absorbed this information without changing expression. 6 of them, Joe continued, Hartwell and 5 others. They're planning to jump you after the evaluation, somewhere isolated. Make it look like you fell during a night exercise. Thank you for telling me. That's it? Joe stared at her. You're not scared? I grew up on the south side of Chicago, Wren said quietly. Hartwell isn't the most dangerous person I've ever faced. Not even close. Who are you? Joe whispered. Really? Wren was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. Tomorrow you'll see. The gymnasium doors opened at exactly 0600 hours. Wren walked in with the rest of her platoon, her heart beating steady and slow while everyone around her vibrated with nervous energy. Recruits bounced on their toes, cracked their knuckles, threw shadow punches at the air, whispered prayers and last-minute advice to themselves. The mats were already laid out in precise rows, their surfaces clean and waiting. The training staff sat at tables along one wall, clipboards and evaluation forms arranged before them. Everything was set for judgment. Find your spots and sit down, Gunnery Sergeant Davis commanded, his voice echoing off the gymnasium walls. When I call your name, you come to center mat. You demonstrate what we've taught you, then you fight whoever I pair you with. Questions? Nobody spoke. Good, let's begin. The individual demonstration started. One by one, recruits were called forward to show basic strikes, blocks, and defensive movements. Most performed adequately. Some were impressive. A few struggled with techniques they should have mastered weeks ago. Callahan. Wren rose and walked to center mat. She could feel eyes on her from every direction. Some curious, some amused. Most already dismissing her before she had thrown a single technique. Basic striking, combination. Go. Wren threw the combination. Jab, cross, hook, uppercut. Her technique was clean but unremarkable. She held back just enough to look competent without revealing anything special. Her movements were slightly slower than they needed to be. Her power slightly muted. Her form just good enough to pass without attracting attention. Acceptable, Davis noted, making a mark on his clipboard. Return to formation. As Ren walked back to her spot, she caught Hartwell whispering something to Colton. Both of them laughed quietly. Let them laugh, she thought. Let them enjoy this moment. It will be their last. The sparring began. First match, Colton Reed versus Patterson. Patterson was a medium-sized recruit from Ohio who had been performing adequately in training. He had technique. He had heart. But he was nowhere near Colton's size or athleticism. The match lasted 90 seconds. Colton overwhelmed him with aggressive rushing attacks, using his weight advantage to push Patterson around the mat like a rag doll. A heavy overhand right ended the fight, dropping Patterson like a stone. Winner, Reed, Corporal Nash announced. Colton raised his arms in triumph, playing to the watching recruits like a professional wrestler. Who's next? He shouted. Come on, give me a real challenge. Second match, Tanner Vance versus Williams. Tanner won with wrestling takedowns, controlling his opponent on the ground and forcing a tap out with a shoulder lock. Third match, Hartwell versus Anderson. Hartwell won with brutal efficiency, clean technique, maximum damage, no wasted movement. He barely broke a sweat. Match after match went exactly as expected. The big recruits dominated. The smaller ones survived or lost. Ren watched everything. She noted how Colton dropped his guard when he rushed forward, the way his right hand dipped just before he threw his overhand, the slight lean in his stance that telegraphed which direction he would move. She observed Tanner's habit of committing too much weight to his takedowns, the way his head dropped when he shot in, the predictable pattern of his wrestling sequences. She saw Hartwell telegraph his combinations by shifting his shoulder a half second before throwing, the tension in his jaw that appeared when he was about to attack, the slight narrowing of his eyes. Every weakness, every pattern, every exploitable habit. She cataloged them all. Callahan. Ren stood, her heart rate increased slightly, but her expression remained perfectly calm. Your opponent, Davis continued, and Ren could swear she saw something like anticipation in his eyes. Reed. The gymnasium went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then the laughter started. Oh man, someone said loudly, she's going to die. Pixie versus the linebacker. This should last about 5 seconds. Someone call medical. They're going to need a stretcher. I've got $20 on under 10 seconds. Any takers? I'll take under 5. She's going to be unconscious before she knows what hit her. Colton Reed was grinning from ear to ear as he walked to center mat. He towered over Ren by more than a foot. His arms were bigger than her thighs. He outweighed her by at least 75 pounds of solid muscle. Hey, Pixie, he said quietly as they faced each other. Don't worry, I'll make it quick. Won't hurt for long. Ren said nothing. She simply watched him, watching the way his feet were positioned, watching the slight tension in his shoulders, watching the overconfidence that radiated from his body like heat from a furnace. She had seen this stance 100 times in Chicago, in warehouse fights, in parking lot brawls, in every situation where a larger opponent assumed size guaranteed victory. They had all been wrong. Corporal Nash stepped between them. Touch gloves and fight. Colton tapped Ren's gloves dismissively, like he was humoring a child who wanted to play a game she couldn't possibly understand. Ren tapped back. Her eyes never left his face. The whistle blew. Colton did exactly what Ren knew he would do. He charged forward with a wild overhand right, putting every ounce of his 210 pounds behind the punch. The same move that had knocked out Patterson. The same move he had probably used in a dozen bar fights back in Texas. The move that had never failed him because nobody his size had ever needed a backup plan. He expected to end the fight with one blow. But Ren wasn't there anymore. She had slipped it to her left with timing so precise, it looked like she had known the punch was coming before Colton had even decided to throw it. His massive fist whistled past her ear, hitting nothing but air. The momentum of his missed swing carried him forward, off balance, exposed, vulnerable. For anyone watching, time seemed to slow down. Ren's right hand shot upward in a compact uppercut that caught Colton directly under the chin. The punch wasn't thrown with devastating power. It didn't need to be. It was timed perfectly, landing at the exact moment when his jaw was most vulnerable, when his weight was shifted forward and he had no base to absorb the impact. His head snapped back. Before he could recover, before his brain could even process what had happened, Ren was already moving. A left hook crashed into his liver with surgical precision, landing exactly where the organ sat vulnerable beneath the ribs. The pain was indescribable. A wave of nausea and agony that short-circuited every thought in Colton's head. He bent forward instinctively, trying to protect himself. Her knee came up to meet his descending face. The impact echoed through the silent gymnasium like a gunshot. Colton's eyes rolled back. His legs went boneless. 210 pounds of former college linebacker collapsed to the mat like a building being demolished, hitting the ground with a heavy thud that made several recruits gasp out loud. Total elapsed time, 7 seconds. The silence was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Every person in that gymnasium was frozen, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The smallest recruit in the platoon had just knocked out the biggest, most confident fighter among them in less time than it takes to tie a shoe. Ren stood over Colton's unconscious body, her hands still raised in fighting position. Her breathing was steady. Her expression hadn't changed at all. She looked like someone who had just completed a routine training exercise, not someone who had just demolished a man nearly twice her size. "What the hell?" someone whispered. Corporal Nash rushed forward to check on Colton. The big man was already starting to stir, groaning and blinking in confusion. Nash helped him sit up, but Colton clearly had no idea where he was or what had happened. "Match," Nash announced, his voice slightly unsteady. "Winner Callahan." Vance, center Matt. You're fighting Callahan." Tanner Vance walked to the mat with considerably less confidence than Colton had shown. He had watched what happened. He had seen one of the biggest, strongest men in the platoon get demolished in seconds. He was a wrestler, not a striker, but he wasn't stupid enough to think that would save him. "Look," he said quietly as they faced each other, "I know I said some things before about you not belonging here. I was wrong, okay?" Ren tilted her head slightly. "Are you asking me to go easy on you? I'm asking you not to kill me." "Then don't give me a reason to." The whistle blew. Tanner didn't charge like Colton had. He was smarter than that. He circled carefully, his hands extended, looking for an opportunity to grab Ren and take the fight to the ground where his wrestling skills would give him an advantage. Ren let him circle. She appeared to be waiting, defensive, maybe even uncertain. It was exactly the opening Tanner needed. He shot forward for a double-leg takedown. It was his signature move, the technique he had used to win dozens of wrestling matches in college. His form was textbook, low-level change, head to the side, driving through with his powerful legs. Against most opponents, it would have been unstoppable. Ren sprawled. The move was so fast it looked like a video glitch. One moment she was standing directly in Tanner's path. The next moment her legs had shot backward and her hips had dropped low, leaving Tanner grasping at empty air. At the same time, her forearm came down hard across the back of his neck. The blow drove his face toward the mat and killed his forward momentum completely. Tanner found himself flat on his stomach with Ren's full weight pressing down on his back. Before he could scramble to his feet, he felt arms wrapping around his neck. Rear naked choke, one arm across the throat, the other hand gripping the bicep, airway completely cut off. Tanner struggled. He tried to stand, but Ren rode him like a backpack. He tried to roll, but she rolled with him, never losing position. His face turned red. His struggles became frantic, then weaker. "Tap," Ren said calmly, "or sleep. Your choice." Tanner tapped, hard, repeatedly, desperately. Ren released the choke instantly and rose to her feet. Winner Callahan. 4 more matches followed. Williams lasted 30 seconds before a judo throw, an armbar forced him to tap. Carter lasted 40 seconds before a triangle choke put him to sleep. Anderson lasted 25 seconds. Mitchell lasted even less. 6 Marines, 6 victories, total time less than 4 minutes. When the final match ended, Ren stood in the center of the mat, surrounded by the groaning, confused, and thoroughly defeated bodies of men who had spent weeks laughing at her, mocking her, calling her Pixie. She wasn't breathing hard. Neither were they laughing anymore. Davis stood up from his chair. "Recruits," he said, his voice carrying across the silent gymnasium. "What you just witnessed is the difference between a fighter and a warrior, between someone who relies on size and someone who has mastered technique, between arrogance and competence." He looked directly at Ren. "Callahan, where did you learn to fight like that?" "My grandmother, sir. She was a boxing instructor at Fort Bragg for 15 years. She taught me that survival isn't about being the biggest or the strongest. It's about never giving up, ever. Your grandmother taught you well. Yes, sir, she did. And part 4, the reckoning. That night, the barracks felt different. Wren walked through the door and every conversation stopped. 46 pairs of eyes followed her as she made her way to her bunk. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Colton Reed was the first to break the silence. He stood up from his bunk, his face swollen and bruised, and walked slowly toward Wren. The other recruits tensed, uncertain what was about to happen. He stopped 3 feet away. "I owe you an apology," Colton said. His voice was different now, quieter, humbled. "I spent weeks making your life miserable. I called you names. I bet against you. I treated you like you didn't belong here." Wren looked up at him. "I was wrong," Colton continued. "I was so wrong it's embarrassing. And I'm sorry, genuinely sorry." "Apology accepted," Wren said simply. "That's it? Just like that? You made a mistake. You admitted it. That takes courage. What else is there to say?" Colton stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. "You're something else, Callahan." "So I've been told." Over the next hour, more recruits approached Wren's bunk. One by one, they came to offer apologies, ask questions, or simply introduce themselves properly for the first time. Tanner Vance wanted to know how she had countered his takedown so perfectly. "I've shot that double leg 1,000 times," he said, still rubbing his neck where her forearm had landed. "Nobody has ever sprawled that fast, nobody." "Your head drops when you shoot," Wren told him. "It's a tell. You also commit too much weight to your forward leg, which means you can't change direction if your opponent moves. Fix those 2 things and you'll be much harder to stop." Tanner stared at her like she had just revealed the secrets of the universe. Williams wanted to know about the judo throw that had sent him crashing to the mat. "I outweigh you by 100 pounds, he said. "How did you even move me?" "I didn't move you. You moved yourself. I just redirected your momentum." Wren demonstrated the grip, the hip position, the direction of force. When someone pushes against you, they expect you to push back. Instead, you pull them in the direction they're already going. Their own strength becomes their weakness. Carter wanted to know about the triangle choke that had put him to sleep. Anderson wanted to understand the pressure point strike that had dropped him. Mitchell wanted to learn everything. Wren answered their questions patiently, demonstrating techniques, explaining principles, correcting errors. It was what her grandmother had done for 15 years at Fort Bragg. It was what Maggie had always believed, that true strength wasn't about being the best fighter in the room. It was about making everyone else in the room better. Joe Whitfield sat on the edge of her bunk, watching the impromptu training session with tears in her eyes. "I knew you were different," Joe said quietly when there was a pause in the questions. "From the first day, something about the way you moved, the way you watched everything. I knew you were hiding something. Why didn't you say anything? Would you have told me the truth?" Wren considered the question. "Probably not then." "What about now?" Wren looked around the barracks. At the men who had mocked her for weeks, who were now hanging on her every word. At the woman who had abandoned her and then found the courage to warn her about the attack. At the new reality that had emerged from the ashes of the old one. "Now," Wren said, "I think we're all starting over." The attack came at 0200. Wren was walking back from the latrine when shadows detached from the darkness around her. 6 of them, moving in coordinated formation, cutting off her escape routes with military precision. Sergeant Bryce Hartwell stepped into the dim light. "Told you accidents happen in training," and he said. His face was twisted with rage. Wren stopped walking, assessed her situation in milliseconds. 6 opponents, limited space, no witnesses. They were big, they were trained, but they were overconfident. "This isn't training," Wren replied calmly. "This is 6 men attacking 1 woman in the middle of the night. That's called cowardice. Call it whatever you want." Hartwell's voice was cold. "When we're done, you'll be too injured to continue. Medical discharge happens all the time." "Last chance," Wren said. "Walk away now, and this doesn't have to happen." Hartwell laughed. "I'm going to enjoy this." And he rushed forward. Usa. Hartwell was faster than Colton had been, more experienced. His punch was aimed at Wren's solar plexus, designed to incapacitate. Wren wasn't there. She had already moved, sliding sideways, letting Hartwell's momentum carry him past her. Her elbow came up hard into his kidney as he passed. He grunted, stumbled. The other 5 attacked simultaneously. Wren became water. She flowed between their strikes, never where they expected her to be. A fist whistled past her ear. A kick missed her ribs by inches. She ducked, weaved, waited for her openings. The first man went down when she drove her thumb into the nerve cluster behind his ear, unconscious before he hit the ground. The second fell when she caught his arm and hyperextended his elbow. The crack was audible. He screamed and collapsed. The third took a kick to the knee that bent it sideways. He went down howling. A palm strike to the fourth man's nose. Blood exploded across his face. The fifth man tried to run. Wren caught him from behind, applied a chokehold, and put him to sleep in seconds. That left Hartwell. He had recovered now and was circling her carefully. He had seen what she could do. He was afraid. "You're dead," he said. His voice was shaking. "Then come kill me." Hartwell attacked with everything he had. Clean technique, good footwork. But he was fighting angry, and angry fighters made mistakes. Wren let him push her backward, making him think he was winning. His confidence grew. His attacks became more aggressive, more predictable. When he threw a heavy right cross, Wren stepped inside. Her forehead slammed into his nose. Hartwell's head snapped back. Blood poured from his shattered nose. Before he could recover, Wren had swept his legs and put him on the ground. She mounted him, knees pinning his arms, face inches from his. "You wanted to know what happens when you threaten me?" she whispered. "This is what happens." She could have killed him. He knew it. She could see the terror in his eyes. Instead, she stood up and stepped back. "Crawl back to your barracks. Tell anyone who asks that you fell down the stairs. And if you ever come near me again, I won't be so merciful." Wren walked away without looking back. Staff Sergeant Beckett called Wren into her office the next morning. 6 recruits were found injured near the latrines last night, Beckett said. Broken arm, broken nose, multiple contusions. They claim they were attacked by an unknown assailant. "That's unfortunate," Wren replied. "Hartwell's career is over," Beckett continued. "Not officially, but Colonel Mercer knows what happened, through channels that don't leave paper trails." She leaned forward. "His next evaluation will be devastating. His promotion will be denied. He'll be transferred somewhere miserable. He'll resign within a year. That's not justice. Welcome to the military, Callahan. Sometimes justice happens in the shadows." Beckett paused. "Colonel Mercer wants to see you." Colonel Douglas Mercer was standing at his window when Wren entered his office. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, a living legend of the Marine Corps. "Close the door, Callahan." Wren obeyed. "I've been reviewing footage from yesterday's evaluation," Mercer said without turning around. "I've also read your background file. Chicago, South Side, parents killed when you were 8, raised by your grandmother." "Yes, sir." "What your file doesn't mention is the underground fighting circuit." Mercer finally turned to face her. "Warehouse districts, abandoned factories, cash in parking lots." Wren's blood ran cold. "My grandmother was sick, sir. The medical bills were destroying us. I did what I had to do." Mercer studied her for a long moment. "Margaret Callahan," he said, "your grandmother." "Sir?" "My wife was trained by her at Fort Bragg, 1982. Sarah was one of the first women to enter a combat support unit." Mercer's voice softened. "Your grandmother prepared my wife for everything she would face. Sarah told me that without Maggie Callahan, she never would have survived her first deployment." Wren felt her throat tighten. "I'm not going to report the underground fighting," Mercer continued. "You protected your family. I respect that." He reached into his desk and pulled out a piece of paper. "I'm recommending you for reconnaissance selection. It starts next week. This is highly irregular, but you're highly irregular." "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Earn it." Mercer stood and extended his hand. "Your grandmother would be proud of what you did yesterday, and she would be proud of what you're going to become." But epilogue, the warrior. Graduation day arrived 3 weeks later. The sun rose over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The parade ground was immaculate. Every blade of grass trimmed to regulation height. Every flag hanging at perfect attention. Families had gathered in the bleachers, some of them having traveled across the country to witness this moment. Wren stood in formation with Air Platoon, wearing the same uniform as everyone else but carrying herself differently. The frightened recruit who had stepped off the bus months ago was gone. In her place stood a Marine, a warrior, a woman who had proven herself in ways that would be talked about for years. Her family had come from Chicago, aunts and uncles and cousins she hadn't seen since her grandmother's funeral. They sat in the bleachers, wearing their Sunday best, looking both proud and slightly uncomfortable in this military environment. They had known her as the quiet girl who lived with her grandmother. They had no idea what she had become. Colonel Mercer presided over the ceremony, his chest full of medals, his voice carrying across the parade ground with the authority of someone who had earned every word he spoke. Today, Mercer said, you leave as Marines, you enter a brotherhood that stretches back more than 200 years to the founding of our nation itself. You join a line of warriors who have defended freedom on every continent, in every climate, against every enemy. He paused, letting his words sink in. But being a Marine is not just about fighting, it's about honor. It's about courage, it's about commitment. It's about being willing to do what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. His eyes swept across the formation, and Wren could have sworn they lingered on her for just a moment. Some of you will go on to do extraordinary things. Some of you will serve quietly and faithfully. All of you will carry the title of Marine for the rest of your lives. Earn it every single day. When Wren's name was called to receive special recognition for combat excellence, the applause was thunderous. Colton Reed and Tanner Vance cheered loudest of all, jumping to their feet, whistling and clapping like they were at a championship football game instead of a military ceremony. The other recruits joined them, a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Wren walked to the podium, shook Colonel Mercer's hand, accepted the certificate and the medal that came with it. She looked out at the crowd, at her family, at the men who had once been her tormentors and were now something like friends. Thank you, she said simply, because there were no words for what she felt. After the official ceremony, the formation broke and families rushed to embrace their new Marines. Wren found herself surrounded by relatives she barely knew, all of them wanting to hug her, congratulate her, tell her how proud they were. Her Aunt Clara, her mother's sister, held Wren's face in her hands and wept openly. Your mother would be so proud, Clara said. Your father too. They're watching, I know they are. And Grandma Maggie, Wren said, she's watching too. That woman, Clara said, shaking her head. We never understood her. Never understood what she did, why she was so hard on you. But now I see it. Now I understand. She wiped her eyes. She made you into something extraordinary. She made me into someone who could survive, Wren said. Everything else I did myself. The afternoon was a blur of photographs and congratulations and promises to stay in touch. Colton found her and shook her hand formally, then pulled her into a bear hug that lifted her off her feet. I still can't believe you knocked me out in 7 seconds, he said, laughing. 7 seconds. I'm going to be hearing about that for the rest of my life. You could learn to block, Wren suggested. You could teach me. Maybe I will, someday. Tanner approached next, more subdued but no less sincere. I was wrong about you, he said, or about everything. And I want you to know that I'm going to do better. Be better, because of what you showed me. What did I show you? That strength isn't about size. That heart matters more than muscle. That underestimating someone is the worst mistake you can make. He shrugged. Basic stuff, I guess. But I needed to see it to understand it. Joe Whitfield waited until the crowd had thinned before approaching. She and Wren embraced for a long moment, no words necessary. I'm being stationed at Camp Pendleton, Joe finally said. What about you? Reconnaissance training. Starts next week. Of course it does, Joe smiled. You're going to be something special, Wren Callahan. You already are. That evening, Wren sat alone on a bench overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. Grandma Maggie, I did it. I graduated top of my class. I earned a place in reconnaissance training. But more importantly, I found people who believe in me. People who started as enemies and became friends. You taught me that strength isn't about size. It's about heart. It's about determination. It's about never giving up. I understand now why you pushed me so hard. You weren't just teaching me to fight. You were teaching me to live. Your legacy, from Fort Bragg to Chicago to San Diego, lives in me now, and I will pass it on, just like you passed it to me. I love you, I miss you, and I will make you proud for the rest of my life. Your granddaughter, Wren. She folded the letter and held it against her chest. The waves crashed against the rocks below. The eternal rhythm of the ocean that had been here long before humans existed and would continue long after they were gone. The stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, pinpricks of light that her grandmother had once told her were the souls of warriors who had gone before. They watch over us, Maggie had said. The ones who came before. The ones who fought and bled and died so that we could be here. They're not gone. They're just waiting for us to join them. Wren thought about her parents, taken too soon by violence they didn't deserve. She thought about her grandmother, who had lived a long life filled with purpose and sacrifice. She thought about the soldiers Maggie had trained, the lives she had saved through the skills she had passed on. A legacy. That's what Maggie had given her. A legacy of strength and resilience and the determination to never give up, no matter how hard things got. Tomorrow, reconnaissance training would begin. The next phase of a journey that would take her to places she couldn't yet imagine, to challenges she couldn't yet comprehend. She would be tested again, pushed to her limits again, forced to prove herself again. But she wasn't afraid. She had never been afraid. Fear was just another obstacle, and Wren Callahan had spent her entire life learning to overcome obstacles. She stood up from the bench, tucking the letter into her pocket. The last light of the sun was disappearing below the horizon, and the depot was growing quiet as families left and new Marines prepared for whatever came next. Somewhere behind her, she could hear laughter, the sound of people who had survived something difficult together and had found joy on the other side. The sound of a new family forming, forged in the fires of shared hardship. She had come here alone, carrying nothing but the lessons her grandmother had taught her and the pain of everything she had lost. She was leaving as part of something larger, a sisterhood and brotherhood of warriors who had seen what she could do and had accepted her as one of their own. The girl they had laughed at had become the woman who silenced them all. The pixie had become the phoenix. The recruit they had dismissed as too small, too weak, too female had become a Marine who would go on to do things that none of them could yet imagine. And this was only the beginning. Wren Callahan walked back toward the barracks, her footsteps steady on the concrete, her head held high. The stars were fully out now, a canopy of light that stretched from horizon to horizon. Somewhere up there, her grandmother was watching. And Wren knew with absolute certainty that Maggie Callahan was proud.